What if the universe did not punish restraint but rewarded it? What if the very energy you waste in pleasure is the same force the cosmos uses to carve destiny? In the language of psychology, semen retention is not merely about the body. It is about the psyche, about the handling of libido, the life force energy that underlies all human striving. For Jung, libido was never just sexual. It was the raw vitality of existence itself, the wellspring of creativity, transformation, and individuation. To expend it unconsciously is to dissipate your strength. To conserve and direct it is to align with the archetypal rhythms of the cosmos. When a man retains, he holds within himself the fire of creation, and the universe responds in kind. Restraint becomes not denial, but magnetism, not repression, but redirection. It is here that the unseen forces of life, those mysterious currents, that Jung called archetypal, begin to favor the individual, shaping him toward mastery and purpose. To understand why the universe seems to reward men for semen retention, one must first grasp what Jung meant by libido. In popular language, libido is thought of merely as sexual drive, an urge toward physical union. But for Jung, libido was never confined to the erotic sphere. It was the fundamental psychic energy, the current of life that flows through every thought, every impulse, every creative act. Libido is vitality itself, the unseen fire of existence, the power that shapes both the individual and the collective psyche. When this energy is continually expended in sexual release, especially without consciousness, it is as though one spends one's inheritance on fleeting pleasures. The energy is dissipated, scattered, lost to the unconscious abyss. The man feels, momentarily satisfied but inwardly diminished, for the reservoir of vitality has been drained without purpose. But when the same energy is retained, when a man holds it within himself, the dynamic changes. The libido does not vanish simply because it is not expelled. It remains, accumulates, builds pressure. Like water behind a dam, it grows in potential power, awaiting direction. It is here that the universe appears to reward the man who practices restraint. In truth, what is happening is not magic, but alignment. By retaining the libido, the individual possesses a reservoir of energy that naturally spills into other dimensions of life. The voice grows stronger, the eyes sharper, the will more magnetic. Others sense this invisible force, for energy is felt long before it is seen. This is why men who practice retention often report an uncanny rise in confidence, influence, and synchronicities. The psyche, filled with energy, begins to radiate outward. The universe mirrors this radiance, responding with opportunity and resonance. Jung often spoke of the libido as the currency of the psyche. Just as money can be wasted on trivialities or invested for growth, so can libido. The man who squanders it through unconscious release finds himself spiritually bankrupt, endlessly chasing stimulation but never feeling whole. The man who conserves it finds himself inwardly rich, capable of investing that energy into creative pursuits, relationships, visions, and the pursuit of individuation, the process of becoming his truest self. Retained libido is like capital that accrues interest, compounding its effect as it is reinvested into higher forms of expression. At the symbolic level, semen retention is the refusal to squander life force. Semen is not merely fluid, it carries the blueprint of creation itself. To hold it within is to hold the archetype of the creator in one's own body. The psyche recognizes this and responds by elevating the man into a position of greater creative potency. He becomes a vessel of life rather than a drain of it. The unconscious registers his choice as discipline, and discipline is a language the cosmos understands. It signals that the man is ready to bear more responsibility, more power, more alignment with the deeper forces of existence. But why does this retention feel as though the universe itself responds? Because energy is not isolated. Jung introduced the concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that arise when inner states align with outer events. When libido is retained, the inner reservoir of energy shifts the man's vibration, his archetypal pattern. He no longer radiates depletion but abundance, not neediness but power. The outer world reflects this shift. Opportunities appear. People are drawn in. Paths open that seemed closed before. The universe does not reward in a transactional sense. It mirrors the psychic condition of the individual. When libido is abundant, life itself becomes abundant. In the language of alchemy, which Jung studied deeply, semen retention is akin to holding the prima materia, the raw substance of transformation. The alchemist does not discard the substance but refines it, transforms it into gold. Likewise, the man who retains does not waste his energy in fleeting pleasure but refines it into vision, creativity, and spiritual strength. The gold of the soul is forged in this way, through the conservation and transformation of life force energy. This is not to say that sexuality is wrong, or that release is inherently sinful. Jung rejected such moralistic interpretations. What matters is consciousness. The man who is enslaved by indulgence lives in unconsciousness, scattering his energy without direction. The man who is conscious of his energy becomes free to choose. He can release with intention, or he can retain with purpose. The difference lies in whether he is master of his libido or its servant. The universe seems to conspire in favor of mastery, for mastery aligns with individuation, the process by which one fulfills one's deepest destiny. When men speak of retention leading to sharper focus, greater stamina, or a magnetism that others can sense, they are describing the effects of psychic energy concentrated rather than dissipated. The unconscious, flooded with retained libido, drives the personality forward with vigor. Dreams become more vivid, thoughts more creative, actions more decisive. This is because libido is the source of all psychic movement. To hold it is to amplify the current of life itself. Imagine a river. When left to flow freely, it spreads, meanders, loses force. But when dammed and redirected, it generates electricity, power, light. Libido is this river. When scattered, it entertains but does not transform. When retained and redirected, it illuminates the entire psyche, and through the psyche, the entire life of the man. This is why retention feels like being rewarded. The energy no longer leaks away but returns to the individual tenfold, manifesting as clarity, confidence, creativity, and synchronicity. In the end, sublimation demonstrates the true power of sexual energy. It is not the act of withholding that is transformative, but the act of conscious redirection. Retention alone preserves energy. Sublimation channels it. Retention builds potential. Sublimation activates it. Desire becomes magnetism. Instinct becomes creativity. And the man becomes a master not only of himself but of the life force that flows through him. Semen retention is often praised for its visible benefits: increased energy, focus, confidence, and magnetism. Yet, Jung would insist that to embrace only the rewards is to approach the path incompletely. Beneath the surface of abstinence lies the shadow, the hidden, repressed, and often uncomfortable aspects of the psyche that reveal themselves when the instinctual urge is consciously restrained. The shadow is not evil. It is the unacknowledged self, the reservoir of suppressed desires, fears, impulses, and potentialities. To practice retention without acknowledging the shadow is to invite inner conflict, psychological tension, and unconscious sabotage. When desire arises, it carries more than physical craving. It carries projections of the shadow: frustration, anger, envy, ambition, aggression, and even lust for power. These are not inherently negative. They are forces of energy that the conscious mind has not yet integrated. In moments of abstinence, these energies can feel overwhelming. The individual may experience restlessness, irritability, or heightened tension, not because abstinence is harmful, but because the psyche is demanding attention. The shadow is saying, "You cannot deny me. I demand recognition." Jung taught that the path to mastery requires conscious engagement with the shadow. The energies that arise during abstinence are raw and powerful. They must be observed, understood, and integrated rather than repressed or ignored. Every temptation, every fantasy, every surge of desire is an invitation to face the unacknowledged parts of the self. To ignore them is to allow the unconscious to act unchecked, potentially manifesting in compulsive behavior, projection, or distorted expressions of power. Consider the man who refrains from release yet denies the intensity of his longing. His shadow may express itself through irritability, excessive ambition, or obsessive thoughts. The very energy he retains becomes distorted because it is not consciously processed. This is why some men report heightened mood swings, aggressive tendencies, or intense cravings during periods of abstinence. These are not failures. They are signals from the psyche demanding engagement. Jung would say that mastery is impossible without encountering these signals. The shadow is not an obstacle to avoid. It is the very teacher of restraint, discipline, and self-knowledge. Integration begins with recognition. The first step is to notice the urges and impulses without judgment. The second is to explore their symbolic meaning. Why does this fantasy arise? What hidden need or suppressed emotion does it represent? What fear or desire is attempting to assert itself? The shadow communicates through intensity. In sexual energy, it is amplified, often dramatically, because libido is life force energy in motion. By consciously engaging with these impulses, the man transforms raw desire into insight, self-awareness, and ultimately, mastery. Abstinence without shadow work is like attempting to harness a powerful river without guiding its flow. The energy builds, but it can spill destructively, manifesting in aggression, obsession, or burnout. By acknowledging the shadow, the individual learns to channel these forces constructively. Anger becomes motivation, longing becomes creativity, lust becomes vitality directed toward higher aims. The unseen energies are no longer enemies but allies. Each urge, each temptation, is a teacher showing where growth is needed, where potential lies unclaimed. The process also illuminates hidden archetypal patterns. The shadow is deeply connected to the collective unconscious, carrying inherited images of power, dominance, and sexuality. By facing the shadow during abstinence, the individual engages with forces far larger than the personal self. The impulses that arise are echoes of archetypes: the warrior, the king, the lover, the creator. These energies can overwhelm or guide, depending on the degree of consciousness applied. The man who integrates them moves from being a passive recipient of instinct to an active co-creator of his psychic reality. Jung emphasized that the shadow is not simply to be tamed. It is to be recognized, accepted, and synthesized. The act of abstinence intensifies contact with the shadow, but it is conscious integration that transforms tension into mastery. Retained libido magnifies the shadow's presence, making its messages undeniable. Ignoring them leads to frustration and inner turmoil. Engaging with them transforms raw energy into wisdom, drive, and authority. This is why the dark side of abstinence can feel so formidable. It is the confrontation with the unclaimed power within. Psychologically, the integration of the shadow during retention strengthens the ego. The man learns that he is not his impulses, but their conscious steward. He discovers the distinction between desire and self, between instinct and intention. Each temptation overcome, each insight gained, is a reinforcement of psychic structure. The energy that once threatened to overwhelm now fuels purpose. Libido is no longer a source of chaos but a controlled current, capable of shaping both internal and external reality. The shadow also teaches humility and patience. Retention is not merely about immediate gains. It is about long-term alignment. The energies that arise demand time, reflection, and discernment. To ignore the shadow is to act prematurely, risking imbalance. To integrate it is to cultivate endurance, self-control, and strategic wisdom. The man becomes not a slave to desire, but a master of the forces that drive both body and psyche. At the spiritual level, shadow integration during abstinence mirrors the alchemical process of transformation. The base material, the raw, instinctual energy, is confronted, purified through awareness, and elevated into psychic gold. The impulses that once threatened disorder become catalysts for creativity, courage, and insight. Sexual energy, fully integrated with consciousness, transcends mere biology. It becomes a conduit for self-realization, aligning the individual with deeper archetypal currents and with the universe itself. In practical terms, men who confront their shadow during retention report heightened clarity, emotional resilience, and a sense of inner authority. They feel more present, more decisive, and more capable of navigating complex social and personal challenges. The power they access is not coercive. It is magnetic, drawn from alignment rather than domination. The universe responds to this integrated energy, reflecting the inner coherence outward in synchronicity, opportunity, and influence. Thus, the shadow is not a threat to abstinence, but the key to its rewards. The tension, urges, and fantasies that arise are not obstacles but guides, showing where the energy must be consciously directed. Retention without integration leaves energy untamed, while integration transforms it into power, magnetism, and creative capacity. The path is neither easy nor simple, but it is the path of mastery. By facing the dark side of abstinence, men access the hidden dimensions of libido, uncover latent archetypal forces, and harness energies that are otherwise scattered in indulgence. The shadow becomes an ally, the psyche becomes stronger, and the man becomes a vessel for life force consciously aligned with purpose, creation, and the subtle rewards of the universe. In this confrontation, the unseen currents of energy become visible, and the power of retention is fully realized. Semen retention, as we have explored, is far more than a physical act. It is the cultivation of psychic energy, the conscious stewardship of libido, and the discipline of the self. Yet Jung would insist that mastery of energy does not occur in isolation. The universe, responding to the inner alignment of the individual, reflects back the state of the psyche. This reflection often appears as synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, unexpected opportunities, and moments where the world seems to respond in perfect harmony to the disciplined inner life. These are the subtle rewards of retention and self-mastery, the visible echoes of invisible alignment. Synchronicity is not luck. It is the natural manifestation of ordered energy. When a man conserves and directs his sexual energy, he strengthens the coherence between his conscious intention and the unconscious forces that shape his life. Libido, once scattered in fleeting release, becomes a concentrated current that fuels awareness, creativity, and presence. The unconscious, energized by retained libido, communicates with the outer world through patterns, symbols, and chance occurrences that appear meaningful precisely because the individual is attuned to them. It is as if the cosmos recognizes the disciplined vessel and orchestrates circumstances to mirror that inner order. The man who practices retention and sublimation begins to notice these correspondences. Opportunities arise seemingly without cause. A meeting leads to a career breakthrough. A casual conversation sparks a creative insight, the external manifestation of an inner psychic alignment. They are not rewards in the sense of transactions, but reflections. The universe, in its subtle wisdom, mirrors the coherence, energy, and direction cultivated within. Discipline is the foundation of this phenomenon. The universe does not respond to desire alone, but to conscious mastery of energy. Sexual energy is potent precisely because at its deepest level, retention awakens the archetype of the hero within. To resist the lure of immediate gratification is to battle the dragon of desire, and in conquering it, the man earns his treasure. That treasure is not only energy but also the respect of the unconscious, the alignment with universal forces that favor discipline over dissipation. The cosmos reflects this victory by arranging outer circumstances in harmony with the inner triumph. The man becomes a co-creator of his reality, not a victim of his instincts. Thus, libido is cosmic currency. Every release is a spending, every retention an investment. The unconscious tracks the account faithfully, and the universe responds accordingly. When a man spends without thought, he lives in poverty of spirit. When he invests with discipline, he lives in abundance, not because the universe plays favorites, but because energy, once concentrated, radiates power. Jung's insight is clear. Semen retention is not superstition but psychology, not magic but the natural law of energy. The man who retains his seed retains his soul's fire, and with it the universe itself seems to conspire in his favor. Semen retention, by itself, is not the end point. It is the gateway. The retained libido is potential energy, a force that waits for direction. Jung understood that energy, when consciously guided, becomes a source of creativity, magnetism, and influence. This process of redirecting sexual energy into higher purposes is what he called sublimation, the transformation of instinctual drives into forms that elevate the psyche rather than merely satisfy the body. Through sublimation, the man converts desire into power, frustration into focus, and longing into creation. When a man retains his semen, he is holding more than life force. He is holding the raw material for personal alchemy. Desire, if left unchecked, dissipates into fleeting pleasure. If repressed, it festers into anxiety or neurosis. But if sublimated, it becomes a tool for shaping the self and influencing the world. The intensity that once demanded immediate gratification can be channeled into artistry, scholarship, leadership, or spiritual practice. Libido, in this sense, is not diminished by retention. It is multiplied, accumulating force that can be projected outward with impact. Magnetism emerges naturally from this concentrated energy. Men who practice retention often describe a subtle aura, a presence that draws others, an authority that feels innate. Jung would explain this as the radiance of the conscious and unconscious aligned. The unconscious, energized by the retained libido, amplifies the personality's expression. Individuals are no longer merely reacting to external stimuli. They act from an inner reservoir of power, a force both felt and perceived by others. The libido, transformed into psychic vitality, becomes influence itself. The creative process is one of the most profound outlets for sublimated sexual energy. Art, invention, leadership, and even problem-solving demand intensity, focus, and persistence, all qualities amplified by retained libido. A musician channels longing into melody. A writer channels passion into prose. A thinker channels desire into insight. The act of creation is not separate from sexual energy. It is its natural extension. What was once directed toward ephemeral pleasure is now invested in legacy, in work that endures. Sublimation also harmonizes the inner and outer worlds. Jung believed that the psyche communicates through symbols, images, and energy flows. When desire is released unconsciously, the communication is chaotic, fragmented, and self-serving. When retained and sublimated, energy flows with purpose, aligning the inner psyche with outer action. The man who masters this flow experiences synchronicity. Opportunities appear, relationships strengthen, and the world seems to respond favorably. The universe, in reflection of the inner alignment, mirrors the power of consciously directed libido. The role of discipline cannot be overstated. Sublimation requires conscious awareness and deliberate choice. Desire will persist. It will call, whisper, demand. But every time the man chooses to redirect rather than release, he strengthens the current of energy flowing through him. This is why restraint alone is insufficient without awareness. The combination of retention and purposeful direction cultivates what Jung would call individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself, fully alive, fully aligned with both unconscious potential and conscious purpose. The shadow also plays a role in sublimation. Desire often carries with it projections of power, aggression, and longing, forces the conscious mind may find uncomfortable or unacceptable. Jung taught that these elements are not to be repressed but integrated. By sublimating sexual energy, the man engages with these powerful instincts consciously. He does not deny them. He channels them, transforming their intensity into acts that are constructive rather than destructive. In doing so, he gains mastery over both the shadow and the libido, creating a balanced and potent inner force. Sublimation amplifies more than creativity. It amplifies presence and influence. The man who has mastered his sexual energy is often more persuasive, more magnetic, more compelling to those around him. Libido, when consciously directed, communicates authority and vitality without a word. Others sense the depth, the restraint, the power behind the demeanor. This is why men who cultivate sublimation often report increased respect, admiration, and alignment with opportunity. Energy, once scattered through indulgence, now resonates outward as magnetism. At the spiritual level, sublimation transforms sexual energy into a conduit for transcendence. Retention allows the libido to fuel higher faculties, intuition, insight, and spiritual sensitivity. Jung's archetypes of the self and the creator come alive in such men, for the retained energy nourishes both body and psyche, establishing a bridge between the instinctual and the transcendent. The man becomes a vessel of life force not simply for himself, but for the world, a living expression of disciplined energy, a point of alignment between the conscious and unconscious. It is important to note that sublimation is not repression, nor does it deny desire. Jung consistently rejected moralistic interpretations of sexual energy. The goal is not denial of the body, but mastery over unconscious impulse. Retention provides the opportunity for choice, the choice to expend energy unconsciously, yielding temporary pleasure, or to redirect it consciously, yielding enduring power. The act of sublimation is the conscious transmutation of desire into lasting influence and creation. The universe, in response to this mastery, appears to conspire in favor of the individual. This is not superstition, but the observable effect of energetic alignment. When libido is concentrated, consciously directed, and harmonized with intention, the man's life unfolds with greater clarity, greater opportunity, and greater resonance. The cosmos mirrors the psychic order he has cultivated, providing circumstances, encounters, and challenges that reflect his internal power. In this way, retention and sublimation do not merely preserve energy, they amplify it, allowing it to flow outward in forms that attract and shape reality itself. Thus, the path from simple retention to conscious sublimation is a journey from potential to expression, from desire to magnetism, from instinct to artistry. The man who walks this path becomes a living example of Jungian alchemy, turning the raw material of sexual energy into gold, transmuting the physical into the psychic, the personal into the archetypal. Libido ceases to be a private, fleeting force and becomes a visible, tangible current in life itself, shaping destiny and aligning the individual with universal patterns.